I felt the compacted sand beneath my feet turn to asphalt as I followed my four colleagues to the large airplane that loomed there in the darkness in front of us. The plane was an American C-130 Hercules transport plane. On this cold and windy night, only my compatriots and I were its insignificant cargo. 5 members of the British SS, all dressed and ready to go on our nightly jaunt in black uniforms, black boots, and black balaclavas. Our hands and faces were heavily smeared with Her Majesty's government's finest black camouflage. Our own mothers would not see us if we walked more than 10 feet from them. A very small load indeed for such a large aircraft, but those making these decisions felt it was worth it. Our armament was light, a selection of light machine guns, standard Browning HD pistols, and our knives strapped to our hips, ready for close combat. That night, we were dropped off far out in the desert where our guys were most unwelcome, not to fight the enemy themselves, but to use the equipment that 3 of them carried on their backs to direct an American airstrike. This would be followed by a frontal attack by a large detachment of select Yankee troops from the north, while a smaller British force would be dropped by parachute on the hills to the south to cut off the escape route of the bastards we were fighting. We Brits and those Yanks were constantly arguing and disagreeing with each other about everything, from what was real soccer, whether or not you should drink beer on the rocks, how you pronounce tomato, to how we liked our women. But by golly, as many wars have shown, when we fight side by side, the other side better take cover. Afghanistan, 2010. North of Helmand Province. 1:45 in the morning. 10 days ago, we approached the waiting flying machine, sitting there like a black bird ready to devour us. We walked under its high wing and, after receiving a final check from the major counting us out, climbed easily up the cold metal ramp that had been lowered to greet us. Once inside the belly of the huge beast, we obeyed the orders of the young but huge, black-skinned loading master with a faint smirk, politely listening to his instructions on how everything was done by what he called the best air force in the world. He was a big jerk, so who were we to argue? Although between us, we probably used more airplanes than he ever flew. As we buckled in, we heard the engines start, and soon we were jolting down the uneven runway, all with our own thoughts of what the next 24 hours would bring. That is, of course, if we survived long enough to reflect on it. In fairness, that night's mission was what we would call foolhardy. The biggest risk was landing in unfamiliar terrain deep at night. Then we lay low, directing the Yankee bombers, and waited for the 7th Cavalry or whoever else came riding in to rescue us. Well, something like that. And if someone didn't show up to give the boys a ride home, it was going to be an awfully long ride back. That's not exactly true, though. That's what my 4 co-workers and friends would do, but not me. No, I had one more mission, albeit a completely unofficial one. The engines had reached a hellish peak, and we felt the acceleration as our mothership roared down the runway. The infernal noise from the wheels on the uneven runway across the uninsulated fuselage suddenly silenced as the huge bird broke its earthly bonds and took to the sky. As expected, the pilot made a wide circle, partly to gain ground and partly to confuse any unfriendly eyes as to which direction we might be heading. What could not be expected at that point was that he lowered the loading ramp again. "Good luck, Sarge," each of my guys shouted through the roar of the plane as I passed them, each of them more than happy to do what they were scheduled for rather than the task that fell to me. They were good friends, and we had fought side by side enough for me to know that. The wild horses would not hide the fact that I had not been with them the entire time. If our commander had questioned them, they would certainly have told him immediately. But he wasn't going to ask them any more than he was going to ask the 2 pilots, the Yankees in front, whom 3 of us had pulled from behind the front lines after they had crashed less than 2 months before. And the loading master? It was a risk, but I was assured he would know to keep his mouth shut. Pulling a pre-prepared smaller backpack out of my backpack, giving a final salute, and wishing good luck in both directions, I descended to the back of the plane and darted into the unfriendly darkness. When I felt the expected tug from the altitude from which I jumped, no one worried about free fall. The parachute opened almost as soon as I stepped out of the plane, pulled by the cord to make sure it did. A few moments later, I found myself dangling over the dark countryside, with only the dim lights from the base we had just left to guide me. All too quickly, the ground tore towards me, and, a little harder than I had hoped, I hit the ground. Rebounding up on the bounce, I gathered my parachute, rolled it up, and hid it under a nearby bush. Maybe someday, some lucky tribesman will find it, and who knows? Maybe some lucky tribesman's wife and daughters will have enough good underwear to last them a lifetime. And then I shuddered. A term that became popular during the Falklands, when British special forces almost galloped, rather than marched miles around the island to take Argentine troops by surprise before defeating them in the Port Stanley area. In a flash, I approached the base's perimeter fence, securely guarded, but no problem for those who had recently rebuilt the defenses and checked it regularly to make sure. Breathing heavily but confident, I was soon inside and headed back to the very airfield I had left less than half an hour ago. Time was of the essence. Washing up quickly and putting on a borrowed greatcoat from my rucksack, just in time, I joined the end of the line of British servicemen boarding yet another transport plane. Yes, one of those big bastards again, but this time one of the later C-130JS. 77, a recruit asked, counting us aboard. It shouldn't be. Go back to school, lad, intervened the burly Scots guardsman in command of the squad. You can't count. But sir, complained the young man, there must be only 76 of them. Are you calling me a liar, boy? Demanded the Scotsman, rising to his full 6 feet, 5 inches of sinew and muscle. No, sir. Sorry, sir. The recruit backed away and went about his business. Find a seat, lad, the Scotsman, my old buddy, whispered to me. I blended in with the others, knowing they'd be more interested in getting home to see their loved ones than thinking about the late arrival. The return flight to Blighty is damn long because of one of those things, especially when you have to land to refuel, saving fuel in Afghanistan for those who might need it more than we did. Plus, it's inconvenient. Damn miserable also when I had to contemplate a problem I was flying home to deal with. It started as a rumor. They were fairly common in the service. There was always someone's wife doing the monkey business. But not my wife. Not Jill. My beautiful, perky blonde that I had a crush on in high school. I guess it was the legs. Not that everything else about her wasn't fantastic, but with legs that seemed to reach her armpits, she was the only woman I'd ever wanted. So what, for heaven's sake? You know what I mean. We were married for 8 wonderful years, and while I slowly worked my way up the ladder in my chosen profession, she did the same in hers. She was a policeman. Yes, to be fair, she joined the police force and became a policewoman, rising to detective sergeant with the hope of soon becoming an inspector. She was good at her job, efficient, caring, a good leader, successful and popular. Too damn popular, by all accounts. Rumor had it that someone else, her co-worker, was also fascinated by those damn legs. He was rumored to be more than fascinated by them, as he had hugged them several times. Her damn superintendent, her boss, and all. The worst part was that it wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a fact. It didn't matter how I knew, but I knew, and now I had to do something about it. Like I said, it was a long, long flight home. Time was running out. We landed at a Royal Air Force base west of London, and in my borrowed coat over my combat gear, I set off for Hartford, less than 1,000,000 miles away. No one in the area would remember the corporal from Raymond, and even if they did, they would never associate him with me. So far, things were going well. By the time I arrived at the estate where Jill and I lived off base, as many of us married guys did, night had fallen. The time difference was confusing, though I had planned it all out. As I stood there, hidden behind a bush on the corner of our street, I thanked the stars that I had managed to catch a few naps during the flight. I took off my REA coat and was back in my combat black clothes, so it was unlikely anyone would notice me. If they did, then that would require some explanation. A little more time passed. Around 11 o'clock that night, my lonely vigil was beginning to come to an end. A large, silver-gray Mercedes pulled up in front of our house. My house, and a tall guy jumped out and rushed to the other side to open the door for his companion. Was that why she was walking? Had my chivalry deserted me over the years? The most outrageously long pair of slender, bare legs swayed, eventually followed by a small, tight, black miniskirt. Yes, I recognized them. I'd recognize my wife's legs anywhere. The bastard took her by the arms and pulled her out of the car and into his arms, where they stood for several minutes, pressing against each other, their lips locked together in a seemingly mortal combat. Sleep with her, I thought. Surely the neighbors must see this. Then I remembered where I'd gotten this information. Yes, at least one neighbor had noticed. Hand in hand, they strolled down our garden path, with the creep unbuttoning her blouse. By the time they disappeared behind our front door, he was already holding her blouse in his hand and unhooking her bra. Jill giggled. I almost threw up. For the next hour, I settled into my hiding place. My years of training didn't make it a problem until I was sure they had at least gone to bed and the neighbors had turned off their antennas. The night's show was over. I sneaked to our back door. No problem at all. After all, stealth is my trump card. There, I grabbed my own back door key and entered, listening carefully to make sure no one was around, but nearly scared the life out of myself when something grazed my foot. Hell, I almost screamed out loud, holding back when I heard our cat, Bubbles, meowing a welcome home message to me. Well, at least someone wanted me back. A quick pet, and Bubbles was happy and off to chase imaginary mice or whatever her duty was. Satisfactorily done, I didn't have to worry too much about stealth. I could bring half the damn Taliban and their camels home with me because they wouldn't notice. Jill had always been noisy in bed, but even from downstairs, this seemed exceptional. Maybe no more so than in our early days when we'd embarrassed both of our parents a few times, but it hadn't been anything like that between us for quite some time. I climbed the stairs tiredly and stood, listening at the door. Doesn't that weakling hubby of yours ever serve you? Not like you do, John dear. He's too busy out there fighting those rascals. Maybe one of them will shoot his poor ass if he's lucky. Please don't say that, John. He doesn't have me like you do, but he's a hero of sorts, and I still love him despite what I'm doing to you. His loss is my gain. Sergeant, only until he comes back, Mr. Superintendent, sir. Then this will all be over. You mean until he's gone again? Maybe. That's what you said last time, Jill. All right then. I guess I couldn't resist it. I know I shouldn't have taken the risk, but they were so into each other, and I just had to see it. Know it. Call it risk assessment, intelligence gathering, or whatever you want. I just had to see it, if only to give myself the resolve to do what I had planned. I opened the door ajar and peeked inside, immediately seeing the two of them lying naked on the bed, entwined in each other's arms. Jill gasping, the movement of his hairy ass indicating exactly what he was doing with his wedding gear. Standing there dazed for some time, I couldn't move to stop them, nor did I intend to. I just wondered what he had that I didn't. Then they changed position, and I realized the reason why. I saw what he had that I didn't have, or at least not as much as he did. For a few fleeting seconds, I saw what was, no doubt, his pride and joy, but what, unbeknownst to him, would be his downfall. The angel of death was not far from him at that moment, but was not yet ready. The angel of death closed the door behind the horrific scene and went downstairs, where I sat down in my favorite chair and took Bubbles on my lap. Training. Training can teach a person a lot, and as an SAS soldier, I had more than enough training. Training can teach you how to drive a computer, a bus, a train, or even an airplane. Training can make you a better manager, a better salesman, or even a better bricklayer. My training taught me patience when facing the enemy, no matter the provocation. And that's what I did for the next few hours until the noise upstairs subsided. My training also taught me how to use good intelligence, and mine told me that John, bless his soul, would stay the night unless he broke his usual habit on Thursday nights. My training also made me an expert on how to kill people, singly or in numbers. But that would come later. I waited, just as my training had taught me. Then, early in the morning, I lifted Bubbles from my lap and placed her on the couch beside me. Rising from my comfortable position, I crossed the room, bringing my backpack with what I needed. Listening at the door and hearing nothing but the familiar faint snoring of my ever-loving wife and a louder one I didn't recognize, I carefully pushed open the bedroom door. Again, they were both sleeping soundly there, both exhausted from their workouts. Bedding was strewn everywhere, more on the floor than on the bed. I had no desire to look at it, but my heart skipped a beat as I stared at my beautiful wife lying there naked, as if waiting for her next lover to come calling. Damn. She was even still wearing high heels. That was going to hurt. It always made her long legs seem even longer, and I thought it was our specialty. Then again, I was wrong about a lot of things, wasn't I? Satisfied that they were both sound asleep, I silently walked over to the bed and pulled out a piece of absorbent cotton, which I doused generously with liquid from a small bottle. No, it wasn't chloroform, but something similar, more modern, more effective, and rather poorly tracked. Pressing it tightly against the bastard's mouth and nose, I held it there until his breathing changed. He was out, and when he should have woken up, he just couldn't. I would have liked him to know what was going to happen to him, but I couldn't risk it. Satisfied with my work, I pulled out my knife. Yes, the one I had with me in Afghanistan. And, with some prior knowledge, yes, training again, I carefully made an incision on his throat, not cutting like some crazed killer, but more like a surgeon. Having just sliced his jugular vein, his lifeblood began to flow out until it became a steady trickle, giving him, I estimated, about 10 minutes or so to leave our land. I then turned my attention to Jill, who thankfully wasn't bothered by the impending demise of her lover because, like any good soldier, I had a plan B. Fortunately, because while it would have worked, it would have been a lot messier, and Jill would never have known what happened to poor John either. Now, that would have been a real shame, wouldn't it? I silently rummaged through her work clothes and found what I was looking for. A pair of handcuffs, standard police issued to her. Better that than using the plastic ties I'd bought just in case, I thought. Carefully taking her outstretched hand, I dragged her arm up to the headboard of the bed, where I attached one end of the handcuffs to her wrist and the other to our old-fashioned Victorian-style bed headboard. Very sturdy cast iron thing it was. It was done. She alarmed me for a moment when I put the cuff on her wrist, but she dozed off again, probably exhausted from all the activity. Poor thing. Then, after casting one last long look at the beautiful, slender body I knew I would never enjoy again, I left the room and walked out of the house, leaving Bubbles the only one who knew I had ever been there. And I was pretty sure she wouldn't report me. The return trip went without incident, and soon I found myself on another flight back to Afghanistan, even having the right seat to board this time on a domestic airline. Prior to the post, I had been in security for a year or so, watching the back of an MI5 guy who was looking after someone very important to world peace. One day, I had to intervene when some guy got too close to them, which might not have been so disturbing if it wasn't for the fact that he had a gun. His swarthy buddy pointed the weapon at the bodyguard. I took that one down with one shot, but before I could shoot the other one, the MI5 agent took the first one down. A job well done, and I got a medal, albeit incognito. Pissed as hell at the MI5 guy, whose real name I never learned, a citation from the US government, and a 3-month vacation. Great, except my cover was blown, and I was reassigned. I ask you, to jet around the capitals of the world and stay in fancy hotels, or to parachute into hostile territory to come face to face with the Taliban, which would you choose? However, I ended up with a couple of extra ID cards and passports that came with them. Lost them, sir? This was my application, and they had heard this before but signed the form, and that was the end of it. It did come in handy, however, for buying airline tickets when you didn't want anyone to know you were the one buying them. So, this brought me back not too far from where I started when all my carefully thought-out plans went awry. I had intended to contact my group on the way back from their mission. So, imagine my surprise when a phone call to see if everything was okay told me what had actually happened. There was new information. Someone high up in the Taliban and close to bin Laden himself was in a house in the very village we were to attack. The higher-ups, in their infinite wisdom, decided not to risk a frontal assault for fear that bin Laden's aide would flee in the commotion. Instead of the proposed high-level bombardment, they launched a precision strike on the house he was reputed to be sleeping in. Well aimed with a laser designator courtesy of my 4 comrades, all well and good. The house went up in a cloud of dust, but the full-fledged attack never happened, and the glorious 7th Cavalry never showed up to give them a ride home. The result? They were out there somewhere in the desert, coming home on foot, and I was floating up the proverbial bloody river without a paddle. But at least I finally had time to relax and reflect on what Jill's reaction would have been just a few hours ago when she woke up to her situation. Imagine this. Waking up naked to find herself handcuffed to a very sturdy bed soaked in the blood of a very dead lover lying next to her. Gah. After all, my situation suddenly didn't seem so bad. After all, it all worked out, of course, or I'd be somewhere even less comfortable than the horrible barn I was in now. My contact informed me that my buddies had been located, and a helicopter had been sent for them. It had been diverted to pick me up earlier. The team had assumed I would fly in with it to check on them and debrief them. My mates could hardly believe it when the helicopter arrived to pick them up, and my smiling face looked up at them. Back at base, dressed appropriately and, of course, having made arrangements with the guys, I was in the helicopter with the four of them as if I had never left their side. I was scooped up by the same major who counted us, to my eternal embarrassment, as a squad sergeant. The next day, I was the one who got to shake hands with an American three-star general. This was to thank him for allowing us to destroy the enemy of the Western nations. I accepted the praise, and I wasn't even there, for heaven's sake. My comrades were very surprised. They never ventured to say anything, but they couldn't help smiling every time I looked at them. Good thing they didn't give me another damn medal. 3 days later, I was summoned to see the Padre. Though I don't know how exactly, he got the ball rolling. "A delicate matter to discuss with you, Sergeant Adams," he began. "What is it then, sir?" I asked. "It concerns your wife," he continued nervously. "What about Jill?" I shot back, rising from my seat. "She's fine, isn't she?" "Relax, Sergeant," he tried to assure me. "She's in great shape and perfectly fine. But something happened while you were away on that last mission." Once he had assured me again, he explained that the police station got worried when her supervisor didn't show up that day and couldn't be traced. Questions were asked, and when Jill's absence was also noted, someone put 2 and 2 together and got 5. Obviously, someone from her police department knew about their dating. When a patrol car pulled up to our house and broke in, they found the scene. Well, you can use your own imagination. Apparently, Jill was in a terrible state and spent a week in the hospital recovering from her ordeal. Of course, no one even connected me to it. How could they? I was thousands of miles away, fighting selflessly for Britain and her allies. Wasn't I a hero, in a way, even when my dear wife was coming home and cheating on me? A couple of my buddies in the UK have been questioned, as I assumed. They thought I was somehow involved, but so far, nothing has come of it. I dare say that, in time, the case will have to be quietly closed. So, for the future, you may ask? I told them I was in no hurry, but in a few days, they would be sending me back to Blighty on compassionate leave. What am I going to tell her? I don't know, and I'm not sure I'll even see her. I say that because I don't think she'll want to see me. See, what I didn't tell you before is that when I handcuffed Jill to the headboard of the bed, I took off my wedding ring and put it on her finger. So she knows. She knows. She can't prove it and is probably too scared to try to do so, but she knows. And she'll have to live with that fear. That one day I may come back for her, for the rest of her damned life. He who dares will win.